Okay, so we have come to a part in the show where you talked about the fact that we're going to make our case for Notre Dame having the best running back room in the country. So we're going to do that. We're going to go big picture. So we're not going to break down like each individual guy specifically in this portion of the show and say, well, this is why, because this kid could do this, 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 and this. Like that. That's not. We're going big. We're going macro. All right. This is the macro look at this whole thing and why we believe that Notre Dame has the best running back room, top to bottom, in the country. So, Brian, here's your pedestal. Give it to us straight. Why does Notre Dame have the best running back room in the country?
Probably would help if I unmuted myself here as I start my great intro. But it's a wonderful question, Vince, and I'm glad that you ask. And basically, what it comes down to is there's multiple ways to evaluate the success of a player. There's multiple ways to evaluate the success of a room and all those type of things. And one of the ways is to just look at raw data and just say, okay, these guys rush for this amount of yards and these guys rush for this amount of yards, and that's why this group had more, and so that makes them better. And I don't think that's necessarily the best way to do it. And I also don't think that it's necessarily accurate to say, well, these guys had more yards per play and that makes them better, because there's always different criteria that goes into it. But when I look at Penn State and I look at Notre Dame and I compare the two running back rooms and I compare the numbers, I would make a strong argument last year that Penn State had the better offensive line for most of the year. And so their offense also was, geared in a way to where they were going to run the ball more. Notre Dame, you could argue, was benefited from the fact that they had a quarterback that took some of the pressure off. So you can always kind of find different ways to state that, okay, well, this group was more effective than this group based on this one criteria that you use to spin your way into convincing yourself that you're right. And I don't really have a goal in doing that, because I don't really care that they're one or two from a practicality standpoint, but it's more so just about, I just believe it to be true. And so I want to state my case as to why. And, the reason that Penn State's is considered the best is what, guys? It's because they had 2,000-yard rushers last year. I think that's a big – and they're talented, and they had a great year. But I think when people just don't automatically just chalk it up that, well, of course they're better, I truly believe that's the reason why. It's because they had they had more production last year, just more raw numbers. And they did that in the run game, and they did that in the pass game, just raw numbers, yards. And when I say raw numbers, I'm talking about yards. And so last year, for example, Notre Dame's running backs rushed for 2,206 yards. Penn State's running backs last year rushed for 2,454 yards. Last year, Notre Dame's receivers caught 50 passes for 419 yards and 2 touchdowns. Penn State's receivers caught 63 passes for 544 yards and 7 touchdowns. So just on the face of it, guys, it would seem like, well, yeah, okay, it looks like Penn State had the better room if you just look at that data. But Notre Dame had, it's 248 fewer yards than what Penn State's guys had last year. But they did it on 107 fewer carries. I'll make sure my math is correct here. Yes, 107 fewer carries. So when I look at it and you say, okay, if you're just going to go off raw numbers, sure, Penn State's guys were better. But if you look at it from a different area and say, well, what about what they did per snap and taking advantage of the opportunities were there? The Penn State running backs last year, again, who were outstanding, averaged 5.5 yards per carry, had 21 rushing touchdowns on 445 carries. The Notre Dame running backs last season had averaged 6.5 yards per carry and had 27 rushing touchdowns on 338 carries. So as you can see, from a scoring standpoint, Notre Dame's running backs were more effective last year, despite having much, much less production than Penn State did last season. So I think that's a factor. And when you look at like raw numbers, for example, Penn State's running backs last year finished with 2,998 yards Total yards, rushing and receiving, Notre Dame's only had 2,625. But Penn State's backs, and this is the backs that are returning, the backs coming back, they had 508 touches. Notre Dame's backs had 388 touches. So what I look at it and say, just the explosiveness, the ability to get to the end zone, the yards per play, all that stuff, in my opinion, for Notre Dame was better. And they both had their moments of backfields where they played great in big games. And they both had their moments where they didn't play well in big games. But at the end of the year, Notre Dame's running backs were on average about a full yard better per touch than Penn State. A full yard in the run game, 0.9 in yards per play total, including a receiving yard. So, for example, if Penn State rushed for 2,454 yards, if Notre Dame's running backs would have had the same number of carries, because I'm just looking run game right now, as Penn State's running backs last year, you're talking about Notre Dame's running backs rushing for over 2,900 yards compared to 2,454 for Penn State. Like, that's why yards per play matters, as long as you're using that also in the right context. And so if you look at like total yards, Penn State's backs last year had 2,998 yards on 508 touches. If you average Notre Dame's yards per touch and you give them the same number of touches as Penn State's backs, they'd have had 3,437 yards, well over 300 more than what Penn State's backs had. So the problem I have is too often they just look at raw numbers and don't look at the bigger picture. And so, again, it's not that I'm like, you're nuts for thinking Penn State's number one, because they were very good last year. And there's no way to talk down or play down or dismiss two 1,000-yard backs. No way you can do that. Now, they did that in the same number of games that Notre Dame played. So it's not like they played more games than Notre Dame either. They both played 16 games. So I don't want to talk down the Penn State running back room. It's simply that that's a way too narrow argument to make. And this is why Ryan, Vince, Trev, I'm going to get your name right eventually. Sean too, Trevor, I knew I was eventually going to get there. This is why it's such a ridiculous argument to make that I just looked at that article. They don't even have Notre Dame's running backs as honorable mention.
Nope.
In that thing. They're not even one of the 3 honorable mention rooms in there. Like, that is absolutely absurd, because here's the biggest difference for me when I'm comparing the two backfields. And again, the two best returning backfields in college football, like, no question about it. But last year, Katron Allen averaged 5 yards a carry, which isn't bad. And Nicholas Singleton averaged 6.4 yards per carry, 6.38 rounded up to 6.4. So their leading back in yards per carry is much closer to Notre Dame's number 2 back in yards per carry. So Singleton was at 6.4. Jadarian was at 6.2. Jeremiah was at 6.9. And so when I look at this, it's like, imagine if Notre Dame's backs had the same number of touches as Penn State's backs. The numbers would be there. But here's the thing. I don't want Notre Dame's running backs to have those number of touches, because I don't want them to wear down. Penn State's backs are more built for that, in my opinion. But it's more so like, you've got to be able to evaluate this more than just looking at the numbers. And I also think that Notre Dame's backfield, here's the other part of this, the second part of this. So does everybody agree, kind of on page with me? Trevor, I'm going to kick this second part to you, because this is where I think people also don't take enough look at this, is they just look at number 1 back, number 2 back versus their number 1, number 2 back. And the reason that that's a mistake is because Notre Dame does use their 3 backs, more than 2 backs in the backfield. And who was the guy that had the 2 huge plays in the second half against Penn State? It wasn't Jeremiah Love, who ran well on that opening drive, but who made the 2 plays that set up the touchdown? It wasn't Jadarian. It wasn't Jeremiah. It was Aeneas Williams, because Notre Dame does use more than 2 backs. And you talk about going to Penn State's 3rd back, There's no conversation. Those are good players, Corey Smith, Quentin Martin. Those are good football players. They're not even close to having the production that Notre Dame's running backs had last year. And that's, to me, guys, what separates it is they don't take enough into account that part of the room.
Yeah, the depth is the biggest differentiator in this conversation when I compare these two rooms, because I separate into two different buckets. You know, you highlighted all of the what's at the top, the Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price versus Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen conversation. Nailed it. But what separates this truly is the depth in the room and who can you put in when. If I recall, I don't remember Corey Smith or Quentin Martin taking a snap.
They got Kedron Young type snaps.
Yeah.
Like late in game, mop up type of minutes. That's when they played.
Aeneas Williams ended the Orange Bowl as a true freshman with 5 catches for 66 yards. Also had the run on the first drive of the third quarter that put them down inside of the 5-yard line and set up the Riley Leonard touchdown as a true freshman. That right there separates it enough for me. Because then you start getting into Kedron Young, Notre Dame's 4th, arguably 5th running back last season. Because if something were to happen to Aeneas Williams, I would believe that Dylan McCullough would just reinsert Devin Ford back in as a third down running back. So Notre Dame's 4th, arguably 5th running back in the rotation last year was getting the mop-up minutes that Penn State's 3rd and 4th running backs were. And then you look at the makeup of Notre Dame's running back room this season. You get Jabron Bain back, who was your 3rd down running back in 2023. And then you add in Nolan James, all expected. Nolan James, we'll get to that in a little bit. But all of those players that I just listed off expected to have either the same or an elevated role. Kedron Young is going to have an elevated role in 2025. Whereas you go and you look at some of the Penn State kids that we're talking about. You look at Corey Smith, Cam Wallace, Quentin Martin. Their role is most likely going to be the same as what it was in 2024 because they have those two mouths to feed in Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton. And so you look at the overall depth of the room, and it also begs the question, what is the point of depth? It is really difficult for rooms to stay healthy in a 15, potentially 16 game season. Even Jeremiah Love last year for his limited time, I mean, he averaged like 11.2 rushes a game in the regular season. So it's not like they were feeding him 20, 22 times a game. And it was a little bit of a freakish injury when he got hurt in the USC game. Still warmed down a little bit. But then your running back rotation becomes Jadarian Price, Aeneas Williams, Kedron Young, Devin Ford last year. Whereas there's more of a drop-off between if one of Katron Allen or Nicholas Singleton gets hurt, then you're asking one of Corey Smith or Quentin Martin to step up and assume those amount of touches. When you look at their overall production and the efficiency of how they play, I would be more comfortable as a coach putting Aeneas Williams or Jabron Payne or a Kedron Young up into that role than the latter. And so I think that's what separates it the most for me in that conversation.
All right. Any final words on making your case for Notre Dame to be the best room in the country, gentlemen? Are we good?
Yeah. I mean, again, you're talking about picking between two excellent units.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, 100%.
So this is in no way meant to say the Penn State backs aren't really good. They are. Right. And I think even in the chat, we're seeing one of the things that I think misses the boat. I think a lot of people are just assuming that Penn State's 2 backs are both better than Notre Dame's 2nd back. I don't believe that to be true. I don't believe that to be true at all. I think Katron Allen is considered better than Jadarian Price because he's been playing longer and he had 1,000 yards. But again, why? Because he carried the ball more. Jadarian Price had a full 1.2 yards better per touch or per carry last year than Katron Allen had. And so I think that there's an assumption that he's better. I just don't think that he is. And I think that Jadarian's has stepped up in some big moments. I mean, if you look at Jadarian's per carry average last season, if he has the same number of carries as Katron Allen, 220, he'd have finished with over 1,300 yards at his per carry average. So Katron Allen last year rushed for 8 touchdowns. Jadarian Price had 7 touchdowns on 100 fewer carries. Think about that. 100 fewer carries, and he only had about 3350-ish, 3360-ish, 330, 360, or 360 fewer yards on 100 fewer carries and only one fewer touchdown on 100 fewer carries. Not around 100, literally 100 fewer carries. And it was 1106 to 1108 to 746. So what's that? That's 362 yards, right? On 100 fewer carries. And it wasn't like Jadarian's playing mop-up minutes either. You know what I mean? Like, so I think that's where I think if you want to ask why do I think everybody on the planet would agree that Jeremiah Love's the best of that group. Where I think people miss the boat is assuming that Jadarian Price is also fourth if you're ranking the four of them. That's the mistake that I think people made. A&M made that mistake. Purdue made that mistake. USC made that mistake. I mean, you just let's be honest, as good as Jeremiah Love was in the first half against USC last year, Jadarian ran for more yards in the second half than what Jeremiah did in the first half.
Well, here's the rub that everybody's forgetting about. One team in this discussion had a quarterback that had 184 carries and 906 yards and 17 rushing touchdowns. The other team in conversation for this had a quarterback rush for 96 yards or 96 attempts, 302 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns. That production would be split up more evenly. We've talked about it a lot this offseason. I'm not saying that Riley Leonard's carries, yards, and touchdowns would be dispersed evenly amongst the room. Some of those are going to passing attempts. Some of those are going to passing yards. Some of those just kind of live with Jeremiah Love. But that is a huge factor that a lot of people forget about when talking about, one, the outlook of this season. I saw Archer put in the chat, and it's a valid question. Archer mentioned that, hey, if Notre Dame's passing game is going to grow and the depth in the room is such, that means you have to take touches away from the top two guys. No, because you have a quarterback that touched the ball 184 times last season.
Right.
That's where that gets dispersed. It all filters
going
down
to the pass game. Right.
Exactly. And so that's a rub that people forget when evaluating these two rooms.
And Notre Dame's backs don't need as many carries for production. Katron Allen, by the nature of his skill set, and this isn't an insult. He's a good back, but Katron's a guy that needs more carries. He's a lot like Audric was. Audric Estime, I always felt, was better the more carries he got in a game. That's the style of back that he is. And I think Katron is that type of back too. And I actually think Katron might be more effective in an offense where he could carry the ball a little bit more, where he could start to wear on you a little bit more. He doesn't necessarily do that in this offense, nor can he. With Notre Dame's guys, what makes them so dynamic is they don't need 30 catches to break the game open. They need 12 or 12 touches. They've done it with 12. And we saw that against A&M last year. We saw that against USC last year, where Jeremiah goes down, Jadarian comes off the bench, rips off 2 30-plus yard runs against USC in the second half, and takes that game over offensively. And nobody talks about that. They talk about the highlight reel plays Jeremiah had it, and Jeremiah was great in the first half, and he was, but we ignore the fact that he had over 100 yards in the second half of that game, Jadarian did, and took the game over offensively. So they have that. And so to your point, Travis, Notre Dame doesn't need those additional touches. But I also think that because, to your point, I think it's a great point, you're not giving a lot of those touches to Riley Leonard, it would be improper to assume that all those are going to translate into passing plays. I don't believe that to be true either. And some of those passing plays are going to turn into touches for the running backs as well. And I think we saw that where look at the blue gold game. Who led the running backs in receptions and receiving yards in the blue gold game from the backfield? This is Kedron, your 240-pound running back who had 5 catches or something like that, including a wheel route where CJ hit him. So I think those things factor into it. I think we all can agree that Jeremiah Love's that dude. It's the constant overlooking of Jadarian Price, including by some Notre Dame fans. Remember how much we heard before the spring, how Jadarian might get beat out by Aeneas or somebody else, and it's just like, no, okay. And we saw in this blue gold game a reminder of he's that guy. If Jeremiah wasn't around, Jadarian's a 1,000-yard running back last year. And if Jadarian wasn't around, Jeremiah might be a 1,400-yard running back last year. They're both excellent players. Jeremiah is number 1. Jadarian's number 2 right now, but Jadarian is a big-time back. And I think assuming that he's not as good as the two Penn State kids, I think is a mistake. But it's also, we can agree to disagree. That's part of the fun of the sport. I'm simply pointing out, I think that's why people continue to maybe misdiagnose him. Well, yeah, we all know Jeremiah's the guy, but they've got those two, and just kind of almost overlook Jadarian Price. And if you ask me, who would you rather have, Jadarian Price or Katron Allen? I'm sorry, with all due respect, I'd rather take Katron Allen. I mean, excuse me, Jadarian Price. Little slip of the tongue there. I'd rather take Jadarian Price over Katron Allen, because if you're in a duo, then you want the guy that could do more with less also. And I just think he's a more explosive back and a more impactful back. And so I think that's where I think people miss the boat in this argument of why Penn State might be better or on their level. I think that Notre Dame's number 1 is better than Penn State's number 1. And I think Notre Dame's number 2 is better than Penn State's number 2. That's how I look at it.
Okay, boys. Well, we are going to jump into the next part, but just a second. Make sure you guys hit that like button, that subscribe button, that notification bell. Share with your family and friends. And, of course, jump in to the boards.irishbreakdown.com, because there's all kinds of recruiting intel over there. And the dominoes are still falling from that recruiting weekend. So you definitely kind of want to pay attention to what's going on there. So jump on the boards, hit the like button, subscribe, tell everybody. And that's all good things that help us out. And we really, really, really appreciate it.